I didn't see it coming. Not then. Not in that quiet, ordinary moment when the rain tapped against the windows of Westbrook Heights like it had a secret to tell. I was 6 months pregnant, barefoot in the kitchen, slicing strawberries with that new ceramic knife Derek had bought last week, still marveling at how sharp it was. When he sat down at the counter with his usual decaf and said it like he was ordering from a menu. "I want a divorce, Isla." I blinked, more confused than anything else. "What?" He didn't even look up. Just stirred his coffee slowly, like he was savoring the pause. "We've grown apart. My lawyer's drafting the paperwork." There wasn't a hint of malice in his tone, no trace of the Derek who used to pull me into his chest during storms or whisper baby names into my ear when we couldn't sleep. He said it the way someone announces they're repainting a guest room. Final. Flat. Something inside me stilled. The knife hovered over the cutting board, my wrist suspended mid-motion. I searched his face for a crack, for even the faintest tremble in his eyes that would betray the truth. But there was nothing. Just calm detachment. "You waited until I was pregnant to do this?" My voice came out quieter than I expected. "It's better this way. Cleaner." He finally looked at me then, and the absence of guilt made the floor beneath me shift. "We both deserve a chance to be happy." I had always imagined heartbreak as loud, tears, yelling, maybe a shattered plate or a slammed door. But this was silent. A cold current in the room I couldn't step away from. I nodded slowly, turned off the stove, and wiped my hands on the dish towel like muscle memory would carry me through what my brain couldn't process. He stood, buttoned his coat, and kissed the top of my head like he was clocking out of a long shift. "I'll be back tomorrow to talk logistics." And then he left. The front door clicked shut, but the silence stayed. Not the comforting silence of home, but the aching void of something gone missing. I walked upstairs like I was floating. Every step up to our master bedroom felt like I was leaving behind a version of myself. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just moved, deliberately, mechanically, like my body already knew what to do. When I reached the far wall of the closet, I pressed my hand against the baseboard molding and slid it loose. A hidden panel, painted the same pearl gray as the wall, popped free under gentle pressure. Inside it, tucked behind dusty ledgers and a box labeled Summer Tax Records, was the envelope. Thick, ivory paper sealed with my father's crest from Camden Ventures. I pulled it out with a strange calm, like I was simply retrieving an old receipt. I remembered the conversation with my father the day it was drafted. I was 27, drunk on love, and about to marry a man my family barely trusted. Harrison Camden had asked only one thing of me before walking me down the aisle: protect yourself, Isla. Not because you expect this to fail, but because you never know when someone might change. Derek had signed it without hesitation. Maybe he thought it was symbolic, or maybe he was too in love to read past the first few paragraphs. I had watched him scribble his name in ink while my father's legal team watched from the corner of the room. The postnuptial agreement had sat hidden ever since, collecting dust and silence. I broke the seal and read it again now, letting every clause soak through my bones. If Derek filed for divorce while I was pregnant, he walked away with only what he brought into the marriage. Not a cent more. Every business asset, every joint investment, every shared piece of property would revert to me. And the penthouse? It was under a separate clause. Mine entirely. I lowered myself onto the edge of the bed, one hand resting on my stomach as our daughter stirred beneath my skin. My baby didn't need to know yet, but someday she would. She would know that her father gave up, that he walked away. But she would also know that her mother did not crumble. Not now. Not ever. I closed the document, placed it back in its envelope, and returned it to the false panel. But I didn't seal it this time. I wanted it close. Ready. Outside, thunder cracked over Westbrook Heights, echoing off the hills like a warning shot. Rain began to pour, hammering the windows with renewed force. I stood and moved toward the glass, watching the storm wash over the city below. Derek thought he had ended something tonight. But he had no idea what he'd really ignited. I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. The revolving doors of Camden Ventures swept open with a familiar whoosh, and for a moment, I forgot I was 6 months pregnant or that my marriage had just been declared null by the man who once swore he'd love me forever. The lobby still smelled like cedar polish and ambition. Every heel click against the marble echoed the legacy my father built and I had once run from in the name of love. But today, I wasn't here to reconcile. I was here to reclaim. My heels didn't falter as I walked past reception. The staff, eyes wide, offered tentative greetings, some curious, others knowing. Word traveled fast in Briar City, especially in buildings like this where power was currency and legacy was law. I stepped into the private elevator, punched the code for the top floor, and waited as the numbers ticked upward. The doors opened to the executive suite, a space I had known since childhood, the smell of my father's cologne, the sound of pens scratching paper, the weight of strategy hanging in the air like perfume. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window when I entered, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the skyline he helped build. "You didn't call," he said without turning around. "I thought it might be better if I showed up," I replied. He turned then. Harrison Camden wasn't a man who aged gently. He aged like iron. Sharp. Unbending. His gray eyes settled on my face, scanning me like a blueprint. Then his gaze dropped to my stomach. "So, it's begun." I nodded. "Derek told me yesterday." Calm as if he was ordering lunch. My father didn't offer sympathy. That wasn't his way. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured toward the chairs near the conference table. I lowered myself into one, adjusting my blouse across the curve of my belly. He sat across from me, folding his hands, giving me the floor. I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it in front of him. "He's filing for divorce during my pregnancy," I said. "This is still enforceable, yes?" He opened it with a deliberate calm, reading the pages like he'd written them himself. "Drafted by Camden Legal. Executed in good faith. Notarized. Yes, it'll hold." Relief moved through me like a silent exhale, but I didn't let it show. I had more to ask, more to claim. "I want 2 things," I said, steadying my voice. "First, the Vice President of Strategic Growth. I know the position's been vacant since Marlo left. I want it, and I'm ready for it." His brows lifted, mildly impressed. "And the second? Langley and Knox." Now that caught him off guard. "Why them?" "Because Derek's not just leaving," I said, leaning forward. "He's strategizing. He has a divorce attorney already, one he's too comfortable with. I need to know everything. His finances, his communications, his movements. Langley and Knox has always done that for the family, and I want them assigned to me." My father leaned back, his thumb brushing his chin in thought. "You're preparing for war." "No," I corrected. "I'm preparing for clarity. But I won't walk into that courtroom blind." He smiled then, not warm, but proud. The kind of smile Harrison Camden reserved for those who proved they were more than just heirs to his empire. "Good," he said. "Marlo's old office is still empty. I'll have it cleared by morning. You'll need a statement prepared for the press. Your return to the company has to be framed right." I nodded. "I'll write it myself." "And Langley and Knox?" "I want direct contact. I don't want any filters. If I'm going to protect myself and this child, I need full access." He considered it for a beat, then reached into the drawer of his desk and slid a slim black card across the table. "Their lead investigator is Amanda Fisk. She's sharp. Doesn't blink unless something's worth blinking at." I took the card and slipped it into my bag without ceremony. "You know," he added, his tone softening just slightly, "when you married Derek, I knew there'd be a moment when the veil would lift. I just didn't expect you to walk back through this door with fire in your eyes." I met his gaze and held it. "I didn't come here to burn anything down. I came here to build something better. For me. For my daughter." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air, an unspoken approval, a rare thing from a man who believed only in results. As I stood to leave, he reached into his pocket and handed me a key. "To Marlo's office. You start tomorrow. Don't be late." The elevator doors closed behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt steady. The POSTNUP was more than protection now. It was leverage. And Camden Ventures wasn't just my family's empire, it was my new battlefield. And I wasn't just a woman scorned. I was a Camden. I moved into Marlowe's old office without ceremony. No balloons, no welcome banners, no catered breakfast trays. Just a team of IT specialists unlocking her old systems, a few junior executives nervously stopping by with files, and the slow, quiet acknowledgement that Isla Camden was no longer just a name on the shareholder roster. She was now Vice President of Strategic Growth. The first thing I did was change the locks. Not just the physical ones, but digital too. Passwords, cloud access, biometric clearance. Every file I touched was encrypted. Every meeting I scheduled went through my new assistant, Emery, a young but ruthlessly efficient scheduler handpicked by my father. I didn't want loyalty. I wanted precision. And Emery delivered. The press release went live 2 days after I started. Camden Ventures names Isla Camden as Vice President of Strategic Growth. It was clean, professional, exactly the kind of public-facing declaration I needed, not just to the business world, but to Derek. I wanted him to know that while he was planning his exit, I had already built a fortress around what he assumed was his to divide. The media picked it up fast. There were write-ups in Briar Business Daily, a few glossy photos from my wedding to Derek recycled by lazy bloggers, and the usual speculation about whether my sudden return signaled trouble at home or just a Camden power play. I didn't care. Let them wonder. The narrative was no longer his to shape. What Derek didn't know, what he hadn't even begun to suspect, was that while he floated through our penthouse smiling like a man with the upper hand, I had already activated Langley and Knox. Amanda Fisk didn't waste time. Within 48 hours of our first meeting, she handed me a slim, encrypted flash drive. "There's more to come," she said, sliding it across my new office desk with gloved fingers. "But this is enough to give you clarity." And it was. Derek's affair wasn't new. He hadn't stumbled into a connection with his divorce attorney, Celeste Monroe. No, their relationship had started nearly a year ago, before the pregnancy, before the tension. There were emails, hotel receipts, surveillance photos I couldn't look at for more than 10 seconds without feeling bile rise in my throat. Worse than the affair, though, was the trail of money. Personal expenses disguised as business write-offs. Wire transfers from our joint accounts to a shell company registered under Celeste's maiden name. He was funneling funds, small amounts, just under audit thresholds, but consistent. Calculated. I stared at the photos, at the spreadsheet Amanda included with red flags marked in quiet, damning detail, and I felt something crack, not my heart, but the illusion. The image I had tried to protect for so long. The one I thought would shelter my daughter from public messes, from knowing too early that her father could be careless with trust. Derek still thought I was soft. He still walked through the penthouse like I hadn't changed the passwords on the financial apps. Like I hadn't met with Camden Ventures' internal audit team to begin safeguarding our holdings. Like I hadn't quietly revoked his company-linked credit card. The thing about Derek was he always assumed silence meant surrender. That if I wasn't confronting him, I was afraid. But silence, for me, was armor. It was preparation. He'd made no move to leave the penthouse yet. That didn't surprise me. He still believed the illusion of control was his. I let him sip his bourbon by the fireplace, let him watch cable news in the mornings with his tie half done like nothing was unraveling. Let him kiss my cheek out of habit before heading to work, as if routine could rewrite what was coming. He hadn't noticed the copies of the financial records I'd secured, the forensic accountant I'd brought in under Camden Ventures' business umbrella, or the fact that Gregory Slate, my lawyer, was preparing to submit official acknowledgement of the POSTNUP to the family court registry. Let him be unaware. Let him coast on arrogance. Each day at Camden Ventures, I became sharper. I learned the rhythm of the team, reviewed dormant growth portfolios, restructured 2 underperforming investment projects, and sent out a request for strategic partnership proposals that put my name, Isla Camden, on every important inbox in the city. I wasn't just making noise. I was building momentum. Amanda's second report came 5 days later. Derek had confided in Celeste that he doubted Isla would fight, that I'd probably fold to avoid embarrassment. She had reassured him she'd negotiated dozens of divorces like ours, and that public image was always the best leverage. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I closed my laptop that night feeling no fear. No doubt. Only resolve. Derek had spent years believing my silence was submission. He didn't understand it was strategy. That I had grown up in boardrooms and across courtrooms, watching men like him think charm could outplay planning. He hadn't seen me coming. But he would. The war had already begun. And he was still smiling in the dark. He walked through the front door like he always did, jacket slung casually over one arm, tie loosened as if it had been a hard day of work, though I knew otherwise. The man I had once thought I'd grow old with still carried himself like he ruled this penthouse, like he'd already won. But I'd studied Predators in the business world long before I married one. I knew that confidence was often a mask for blindness. "Hey," Derek said, placing his keys in the crystal dish by the door. "I figured we could finally sit down and talk tonight. Just us." I looked up from the couch, my tablet still glowing in my lap. I'd been reviewing a portfolio draft, but I set it aside slowly, deliberately. "Sure," I said with a softness that wasn't submission, it was precision. "Let's talk." He gave me a smile, rehearsed, charming, empty. "I think we can keep things civil. No need to drag this out in court, you know? I've already had Celeste draft a proposal. It's fair. We split assets. Joint custody arrangements once the baby's here. Clean and easy." I nodded, almost bored by his predictability. "That's thoughtful of you." He sat across from me, lounging back like we were discussing vacation plans, not the dismantling of a marriage. "Honestly, I think this is for the best. We're in different places now, Isla. You're more corporate. And I've evolved too. I want something simpler." Celeste's voice echoed in my mind from Amanda's recording, coaching him through this exact speech. She'd said to keep it neutral, to make me feel like the breakup was a mutual emotional necessity. That if I felt in control of the ending, I'd let go easier. I folded my hands in my lap, my fingers brushing against the soft silk of my maternity dress. "That's fair," I said, watching his shoulders drop in visible relief. "And I do have someone I'd like you to meet." His brow furrowed. "Someone?" "My attorney," I replied smoothly. "Gregory Slate. He'll be joining us for the divorce discussions moving forward." There was a pause, just half a second, but enough for me to catch it. The flicker of confusion. The faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. Derek didn't like being surprised, especially not by me. He masked it quickly. "An attorney already? That was fast." "You seemed in a hurry," I said with a small smile. "I didn't want to keep you waiting." He straightened, his casual demeanor faltering. "Isla, come on. We don't need to bring in high-powered lawyers. Let's keep this clean, simple." "You know, I thought that too," I interrupted gently. But then I remembered how much I've already given up. My body, my time, my trust, and how much you've taken without asking. Then he looked up. "Are you planning to go public?" I met his gaze evenly. "Not unless I have to. But if he starts spinning this to make me look irrational, cruel, or vindictive, then yes. I'll correct the record." He nodded, folding the file closed. "The board respects you more now than they ever did before." "I don't need respect," I said, rising from the chair. "I need stability. For my daughter." And I meant it. I wasn't fighting for optics anymore. I was building a foundation. Not just for my career, but for the little girl who would one day ask why her father didn't live with us. Why people whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. That weekend, Derek made his first mistake. He leaked a comment to a business gossip blog, anonymous, but obvious. It implied I'd become unstable during pregnancy, that I'd pushed him away, that my return to Camden Ventures was a consolation prize. Amanda had it traced within hours. And I issued my response just as swiftly. No comment from Mrs. Camden was available. Those sources confirm her leadership at Camden Ventures has resulted in 2 new strategic partnerships and a growth spike of 14% since her appointment. Let the numbers speak. Let the legacy take shape. He wanted control. But I already had it. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in mood, a sterile quiet that wrapped itself around the corridors like an unwelcome fog. My heels echoed off polished tile as Gregory and I made our way to courtroom 3C, where Judge Vivian Ross presided. The woman was legendary in Briar City, brilliant, precise, and utterly unshakable. She'd ruled on multimillion-dollar estate disputes, corporate fraud cases, and family implosions with the same measured composure. And today, she would rule on mine. Derek filed the motion last week, blindsiding no one. After realizing the POSTNUP was ironclad, he did what most men like him do. He claimed fraud. Said he'd been misled, emotionally manipulated, even hinted that the contract was coercively introduced during a vulnerable moment. It was laughable, but still dangerous. If he could get the agreement thrown out, everything would be back on the table. My assets. My daughter's security. My peace. The courtroom was half full when we entered. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but that hadn't stopped several from lining the hallway outside, whispering and jotting notes as I walked past. I ignored them. Let them write what they wanted. I wasn't here to posture, I was here to win. Derek sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Celeste, her face drawn tight and pale. She hadn't worn white today. She looked tired. No more sleek smirks or dismissive glances. Just stress. Derek looked worse. His once confident swagger had dissolved into a restless energy, tapping fingers, darting eyes, a loosened tie. He didn't look at me when I sat down. Gregory leaned in. Stay calm. Judge Ross will see right through him. I nodded, even though my hands were curled so tightly in my lap my nails were biting into my skin. Court came to order promptly at 10 a.m. Judge Ross entered, her robe flowing, silver hair pulled back into a simple bun. Her gavel struck once, and just like that, everything snapped into focus. Celeste stood to deliver their argument, strained, reaching, a carefully rehearsed narrative about a rushed postnuptial, about emotional imbalance, about unfair pressure. She avoided eye contact with the judge when she mentioned the unusual timing of the document. Gregory stood next, his voice calm but direct. He referenced the witnesses, the notary, the time-stamped documents. He highlighted Derek's background, his experience as a financial executive, his fluency in contracts, his history of managing complex transactions. A man who reads investor term sheets for breakfast cannot convincingly claim he didn't understand a 5-page postnuptial agreement. The courtroom was still when he finished. Derek fidgeted beside Celeste, one leg bouncing beneath the table like a child about to be scolded. Then Judge Ross spoke. Her voice was clear, firm, and without a shred of indulgence. Mr. Langston, she began, peering over her glasses, you're a managing partner of Langston Capital, are you not? Yes, Your Honor, Derek replied, his voice thin. And in that role, you routinely sign legally binding agreements, investment contracts, merger proposals, and partnership deals? Yes. Then please help me understand why you signed this postnuptial agreement, witnessed, notarized, and clearly outlined, and now claim ignorance? Derek opened his mouth, then closed it again. He glanced helplessly at Celeste, who avoided his gaze. Judge Ross continued. This court finds the agreement valid and enforceable. No evidence of coercion or fraud has been presented. Mr. Langston had ample opportunity to seek independent counsel and did not do so. The terms of the postnuptial agreement shall stand. Gregory didn't react, but I felt the air shift beside me. It was over. The panicked Derek had tried to cede. The desperate maneuver to claw back control, it had failed. Judge Ross gave a final nod. This hearing is concluded. The gavel struck once more, and just like that, the silence broke. I stood slowly. My legs were steady now. I turned and met Derek's eyes as he rose, his face a mixture of disbelief and simmering rage. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just met his stare like it meant nothing to me, because now it truly didn't. As Gregory and I exited the courtroom, Derek muttered something under his breath, just loud enough to catch. You'll regret this. I paused at the door and turned halfway toward him. No, Derek. You will. Outside, The air felt lighter. Emery was waiting for us on the courthouse steps, phone in hand. The ruling's already trending on social media. Reporters are requesting statements. Tell them I have nothing to say, I said calmly. The court has already spoken. We descended the stairs as camera flashes sparked from a distance. Gregory remained silent, but I could sense his pride in how I'd handled myself. And truthfully, I was proud too. Not because I'd won, but because I hadn't allowed fear to steer me. The wind picked up as we reached the car, tugging gently at the hem of my coat. I rested a hand on my stomach, feeling a soft kick. My daughter didn't know it yet, but today was for her. Every calculated decision, every sleepless night, every tightened jaw and swallowed sob, it had all led to this. Judgment had been passed. And I had prevailed. He showed up unannounced. Of course he did. It was just after 8 p.m., the sun already lost beyond the skyline, and the penthouse bathed in that deep velvet blue only early spring evenings could offer. I had just settled into the couch with a cup of chamomile tea, my swollen feet propped on a pillow, the weight of the week beginning to ease off my shoulders. The calm didn't last. The elevator chimed, followed by the sound of the private foyer door opening. His keycard still worked, though not for much longer. I didn't rise. I just waited, letting the silence stretch. Derek entered, eyes sharp and hungry, a folder clutched under his arm. He looked disheveled, like desperation had finally peeled away the last of his polished image. His tie was askew, shirt wrinkled, hair slightly damp from either sweat or the light drizzle that had started outside. I assume you didn't come to apologize, I said without looking at him, sipping my tea slowly. He dropped the folder onto the marble coffee table with a theatrical thud, then stepped back and folded his arms like he'd just placed a winning hand in a poker game. I thought you'd want to see this before it hits the authorities, he said, feigning concern. I glanced down at the folder but didn't open it. What's this, Derek? Another bluff. He smirked. Proof of insider trading at Camden Ventures. That made me raise an eyebrow. He took the change in my expression as a win and kept going. I've been compiling records, transactions, internal emails. There's a trail, your trail. It shows clear evidence of non-public investment knowledge being used for profit. If this goes public, you'll be finished. So will Camden Ventures. But maybe we can come to an agreement, off the record. I stared at him, really looked at him. The man who once shared my bed, whispered baby names in the dark, who had promised forever with such practiced ease, now trying to blackmail me in my own home with falsified documents he barely understood. I see, I said, placing my mug down gently. You're panicking. I'm giving you a chance to protect what's left of your reputation, he snapped. I reached for the folder and opened it. I skimmed the pages, page after page of manipulated screenshots and fabricated email headers that wouldn't pass even the most basic forensic audit. These are clumsy, I said after a moment. Did Celeste help you put these together? Or did you manage this one all on your own? His jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. I closed the folder and stood slowly. You know what's interesting, Derek? You storm in here with fakes, trying to twist my arm, and yet you don't ask yourself the most important question. He narrowed his eyes. Which is? What do I already know? He didn't speak, so I continued. You're under investigation, I said plainly. Langston Capital is already on the radar of the Breyer Financial Crimes Division. You've been flagged for suspicious wire transfers, misuse of corporate funds, and unregistered shell accounts tied to known tax havens. He laughed, but it faltered halfway out of his mouth. You're bluffing. Am I? I reached for my phone on the end table, unlocked it, and held it up. Detective Rourke from BCFD. We spoke this morning. I submitted documentation from Langley and Knox. Actual documentation, not the sad little scrapbook you made. He said nothing, but his face drained of color. You thought you could intimidate me, I said, stepping toward him. That you could throw a handful of forged files at me and I'd fold. You don't realize I was raised by men who build empires and women who burn them down when betrayed. His breathing quickened, and I knew that for the first time since this began, he truly understood the ground was gone beneath him. You're done here, Derek. And not just in this penthouse. I walked to the wall panel and tapped in the code. A soft beep confirmed the change. Your keycard access has been revoked. As of now, you are not to step foot in this residence again. He stared at me, stunned. You're kicking me out of my own home? This was never yours. You should have read the paperwork. His expression twisted, some mix of disbelief and rage that he no longer had anywhere to place. You think this is the end? You think I'll just walk away? I think you don't have a choice anymore. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something, scream something, but instead, he turned and walked out. No grand exit. No parting words. Just the dull sound of his shoes against the hardwood, then the soft hiss of the elevator closing behind him. The silence after was deep and clean. I gathered the folder and dropped it into the shredder. The pages disappeared piece by piece, his lies reduced to confetti. I locked the door behind me, more symbolically than for safety, then returned to the couch and my waiting tea. It was cold now, but I didn't mind. Because so was I. The conference room we chose wasn't one of Celeste's glass-encased towers of intimidation or Camden Venture's polished strongholds. It was neutral, gray walls, soundproof panels, an unremarkable space inside a private mediation center downtown. Derek's choice, oddly enough. Or maybe Celeste's idea, a final attempt at leveling the battlefield. I let them have it. Let them pick the room, the table, the hour. Because none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that Derek had finally agreed to a settlement meeting. Not because he wanted peace, but because he had nothing left to fight with. He arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by Celeste, whose eyes were hollowed by exhaustion and calculation. Derek looked thinner. Not in the lean, effortless way he once carried himself, but in the drained, frantic way of a man who'd been cornered. There was a tremble in his fingers as he adjusted his collar. He didn't meet my eyes. Gregory sat beside me, calm and immovable. My silent fortress. The folder in front of me was thick, but it wasn't filled with evidence this time. There was no need for more proof. Derek had been buried under the weight of his own choices. This folder held something else entirely. When the mediator called us to begin, I turned to Derek and spoke before anyone else could. I'm offering you a settlement, I said clearly, my voice firm but measured. One final option. You can take it, or we continue with full litigation. Derek straightened, trying to collect the shreds of arrogance he used to wear like armor. What kind of settlement? I opened the folder and slid a copy of the agreement across the table. You'll receive a structured payout over 5 years. Taxable income, not a lump sum. The amount is generous, but finite. You will agree to full confidentiality with immediate legal consequences for breach. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the numbers. They were lower than he probably hoped for, but far more than he'd walk away with if the judge ruled strictly on the POSTNUP. I continued. You'll also have supervised visitation rights. Bi-weekly, once Juliet is born. At a licensed facility, monitored by a third party. His jaw tensed. I'm her father. Yes, I said without flinching. And she deserves consistency. Safety. You'll have to earn trust back. And the company? He asked, quieter. You get a neutral employment reference. No recommendation. No slander. Just a verified title and timeline from Camden Ventures for future employers. That's it. He turned to Celeste, who leaned in and whispered something, but I watched the moment it hit him. This was the best deal he'd get, and the last one he'd ever see. He looked up at me, finally, for the first time in what felt like months. Why offer this? Because I want it done, I said simply. I want to move forward. Not with vengeance. With clarity. He studied my face, searching for cracks, maybe even some scrap of the old Isla he could manipulate. But that version of me was long gone. Take it, Gregory said, his voice like stone. The mediator nodded toward Derek. You can review it further with your counsel, but we do ask for an initial decision on whether you're open to agreement. There was a long silence. Then, at last, Derek nodded. I'll sign. Celeste flinched slightly beside him, clearly unprepared for how quickly he gave in. But Derek didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on the documents like they were an ending he hadn't anticipated, quiet, legal, absolute. I passed him a pen. He didn't hesitate. Once the ink was dry, we slid the confidentiality agreement across next. He signed that too, with the weight of someone who no longer had room to bargain. "Thank you," I said, standing. "You'll receive notice of access revocation at Camden Ventures within the hour. We'll transfer the settlement schedule to your counsel." He didn't speak. Just watched me gather my things. Celeste finally broke the silence. "You could have dragged this out, humiliated him." I paused, looking at her not with contempt, but with something colder. Indifference. "I didn't need to," I said. "He did that to himself." Gregory and I left the room without looking back. The doors closed with a hush, final and clean. Outside, the sky was beginning to shift into the soft glow of early dusk, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I took a breath that didn't feel like armor. In the car, I pressed a hand to my stomach, feeling Juliet shift beneath my palm. "It's done," I whispered to her. Gregory nodded beside me. "You ended it with more grace than he deserved." "I didn't do it for him," I said. "I did it for her. Because this wasn't just about winning. It was about protecting the life I was building, one rooted in honesty, stability, and quiet strength." And that final signature? That was the last piece of the past I needed to let go. She arrived just after midnight, her first cry piercing the quiet of the hospital room like a promise. Juliet Camden Langston, 7 pounds, 6 ounces of perfect, defiant strength. Her tiny fists flailed with surprising energy, as if she had already decided she would not enter this world quietly. I held her against my chest, skin to skin, heart to heart, and everything else disappeared. The past, the courtroom, the betrayal, even Derek. All of it fell away beneath the weight of this new beginning. The room was dim and warm, lit only by a soft lamp in the corner and the slow beeping of machines monitoring my vitals. My father stood quietly near the window, watching the skyline of Briar City flicker through the rain. He hadn't said much since Juliet was born, just a nod, a rare smile, and a quiet, "She's got your mother's mouth." He was right. Her little lips were already pouting with a grace and authority that didn't come from Derek. I turned my head, taking in every detail. Her impossibly small fingers wrapped around my thumb with a grip far stronger than I expected. Her hair, a soft whisper of chestnut, still damp. Her eyes, though barely open, seemed to find mine with intention. I had no idea how long we stayed like that, minutes, maybe hours, but time no longer moved the same. When the nurse returned to run final checks, she smiled at the way I cradled Juliet. "She knows she's safe," she whispered. Babies always do. Safe. That word had eluded me for so long through the unraveling of my marriage, the slow excavation of my strength, the cold precision of strategy over sentiment. I had built walls and drawn battle lines, planned outcomes and preempted attacks. But here, now, in this quiet room with a newborn curled against my chest, I felt something I hadn't in months: peace. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm of feedings, swaddling, visitors, and soft lullabies humming from my phone. The penthouse had been transformed while I was gone. Emery had arranged everything, baby furniture assembled, fridge stocked, the nursery finished in pale gold and ivory, every detail touched with intention and care. My father sent flowers that filled the foyer and a handwritten note that simply read, "You did well, Isla. She is everything." Derek didn't try to visit. Per the agreement, he was allowed updates through his attorney and would be granted supervised visitation beginning once Juliet turned 3 months. Part of me had expected resistance, a dramatic plea, another threat. But he didn't fight. He left quietly, just as the documents required. I later learned he'd relocated to Lakehurst, a quiet town 2 hours outside the city, and taken a compliance job at a boutique firm, a far cry from the glossy ambition of Langston Capital. I was told he'd started therapy. I hoped, for Juliet's sake, that it was true. But I didn't linger in thoughts of him. Not anymore. There were diapers to change, board meetings to lead, and a baby girl to raise with grace and grit. I returned to Camden Ventures a month later, Not out of necessity, but choice. My team had kept the firm steady in my absence, but there were projects waiting for my signature, partnerships pending my final approval. I stepped into the office with Juliet's photo already framed on my desk, her tiny laugh captured on video and stored on my phone, her scent still clinging to the scarf I wore. The press was gentle, mostly celebratory. Camden legacy expands, Isla Camden welcomes daughter while leading firm growth. Some speculated about Derek's absence. Others speculated about what would become of the Camden name now that a daughter carried it forward. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. My presence, my choices, my silence, they all spoke louder than words. I adjusted quickly to the new balance. Early mornings with Juliet before sunrise, late-night calls with partners across time zones, brief walks through the park in between bottle warmings and strategic meetings. It was hard, but it was mine. This life, this rhythm, this daughter, it was all mine. And I would make sure she knew everything I had learned. She would know that love should never cost your voice. That motherhood was not the end of ambition, but the beginning of legacy. That when people try to reduce you, you rise, not with vengeance, but with vision. Juliet would grow up in a world that knew her mother not just as someone who endured, but someone who redefined. She would learn to walk these halls of power with her chin high, not because she was born into privilege, but because she was raised by resilience. One night, I stood in the nursery, swaying gently with her against my chest. The city lights pulsed outside the windows, and her breath was soft, rhythmic. I whispered to her, the words barely sound, but heavy with truth. You were born from thunder, my love. But you'll grow in light. A new era had begun, not just for me, but for the legacy I was now shaping. And this time, it would be written in strength, in softness, and in a mother's quiet, unwavering resolve.